In this video review, we will look at the problem of dollar availability for Egyptians, Egypt's emergence in BRICS and its desire to get rid of its dependence on the dollar. Although at the same time the country remains totally dependent on the same dollar and the payment of cash loans to Western countries. We will also tell you why many businesses in the country are controlled by the police and what colonial architecture Cairo inherited from European countries. What European interests were built around Arab Egypt and the Suez Canal. We will analyze the worsening poverty in Egypt and the role of economic and social factors in this process. Find out why European countries continue to lend to impoverished Egypt, and what the country's prospects are like in the context of global financial trends in the Middle East and Africa. Well, go ahead. This is the capital of Egypt, Cairo. In the land of mysterious pyramids, where every stone is rich in history, where the fabric of time is intertwined with the gold of the sands, today we will look at that side of Egypt that rarely meets the spotlight. Far from the glitter of pharaonic treasures, in the narrow alleys of Cairo, and like in every smallest corner of the country, we are faced with the invisible but deeply felt shadow of poverty. We'll talk about it today. Egypt appears to be holding its breath, shrouded in complex economic challenges that call into question the well-being of its people. Today we take a fascinating journey through the streets of Cairo, in the company of our Arab friend, to consider how life here reflects the stark contrast between the richness of the past and the challenges of the present. Driving our ancient car through the bustling streets of Cairo, we peer into the windows of this Arab world, where history collides with reality and poverty dances at almost every turn, in the shadows of the pyramids. It is no secret that Egypt joined BRICS on January 1, 2024, thereby becoming an economic partner of Brazil, India, Russia, China and South Africa. But is everything good with the economy of this country, where there is a lot of population, but there is little benefit from it, because 32% of the population is below the national poverty line as of 2024? And the modern population of Egypt has long passed the mark of 100 million people. Our first day in Cairo began with this car ride from the capital's airport. Enjoying the warming rays of the winter sun, we begin our journey through the breathtaking territory of the capital. Landing at Cairo Airport, our eyes fill with anticipation and our hearts fill with excitement for the adventure ahead. Following multifaceted roads, our car joins the flow of cars that seem to be fighting in the rhythm of the city bustle. All around us there is noise and colors, crowds of people, cars, excited morning traffic. We pass by many local markets where traders carefully offer their wares in colorful fabrics. Stained glass windows flicker under the sun's rays. Architectural dominance and ordinary residential areas stand like powerful gray bastions, neglected and unkempt, like guardians of time, telling their stories. As well as mosques, ancient stucco buildings and narrow streets that seem to invite us to explore their secrets. In this whirlwind of cultures, colors and sounds, we create our own unique path. Egypt, the most populous country in the Middle East, has had a difficult economic past decade. Today the country is the second debtor to the IMF after Argentina, and the number of Egyptians trying to illegally reach Europe is growing every year. Why is it illegal? Because Egyptians are subject to maximum visa restrictions. And they cannot just get a visa to the Schengen zone. Actually, their passport is very restrictive. Egyptians can now visit 18 countries without visas and another 44 countries by obtaining an electronic visa in advance. Of course, it is difficult for Egyptians to get to Europe, North and South America, most of Africa, Russia, Australia and developed Asian countries such as China, Japan, Korea. And then we will tell you why Egypt is facing this economic crisis. But first, while we are moving through the streets of the capital of Egypt, we should rewind the country's economy 10 years ago. In 2013, Egypt welcomed a new leader, Abdul Fattah Khalil al-Sisi, who came to power as a result of another military coup. This president actively implemented plans for a military coup and played a central role in the events that overthrew the previous president, Mohamed Morsi. By this time, the country was experiencing many difficult economic, social and political problems, which only worsened during the short period of Mohamed Morsi's stay in power. They thought they could save the situation this way. Poverty then exceeded 23%, and the total government debt was about 90% of GDP. Economic growth remained at just over 2% per year and inflation at 10% per year. Unemployment exceeded 13% for the year. The country needed reforms and stability. Sisi promised prosperity to Egypt, but called on his citizens to be patient, since the process could not be easy. This was the default. Now let us return to the situation. What is Egypt's economy like today? Egypt's economy is actually the largest in Africa. By the end of 2023, the country's GDP was more than $490 billion. Unemployment in the country is already 7%, and the number of unemployed in 2023 was insignificant and, according to official data, was falling. But inflation reached more than 37% already in August 2023, and the ratio of government debt to GDP began to increase and exceeded 90%. Then the currency depreciated. Since the beginning of March 2022, the Egyptian national pound has lost 50% of its value. Today the official rate is almost 31 Egyptian pounds to the dollar. When on the black market in Egypt, even in Cairo, you can sell a dollar to the locals at the unofficial rate for 54 Egyptian pounds. As you can see, there is a big difference between the black market and the official one. Local banks have not been selling dollars to the local population for a long time, but are willing to buy them from visiting tourists or investors. The fall of the Egyptian pound began back in 2016, when the country's government received a loan from the IMF in the amount of $12 billion. Along with the depreciation of the currency, inflation in Egypt reached a record 37% for the year. The main causes of inflation in Egypt: a lack of hard currency, dollars. I think this sounds familiar to you, doesn't it? As well as a significant release of Egyptian pounds into the domestic market, and an increase in external debt. Look at the streets we move on. This is quite an amazing city full of different contrasts. Look at people and their daily life. So why can't these people buy dollars in the same banks in Egypt and are forced to buy them from visiting tourists? Why is there a shortage of dollars in Egypt? Egypt's dollar crisis began in 2022 due to global increases in energy and grain prices, two products that accounted for a significant portion of Egypt's exports. Another factor that triggered the dollar shortage in the country was the fall in tourism revenues amid the COVID-19 crisis. In addition, against the backdrop of economic instability in the world and the region as a whole, Egypt is experiencing a significant outflow of foreign capital. Many investors see no more prospects in the Middle East due to the current turbulent situation and are withdrawing money while it can still be done, redistributing this money to other calmer havens. Also, new investors are in no hurry to invest money in a country whose economic situation is precarious. At the same time, a significant part of the country's foreign exchange reserves is spent on servicing the public debt taken out earlier from the International Monetary Fund. Then, in the spring of 2022, Egypt introduced import restrictions in order to maintain a strong currency, but this measure led to an even greater drop in the country's investment attractiveness and fluctuations in the stock market. And now, as we continue our journey through the capital of Egypt, I suggest you pay attention to which countries are the main creditors. According to the Central Bank of Egypt, the country's main creditors were international financial institutions, which accounted for $52 billion. Of this, Egypt will have to return $22 billion to the International Monetary Fund. Egypt owes the Gulf countries, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait and Qatar almost $46 billion. That is why all the dollars go there, and nothing falls from the banks to the population. Egypt owes about $10 billion to the Paris Club of Creditors: Germany, Japan, Great Britain, France and the United States. Egypt will have to give about $8 billion to China. And here is a logical question. Where are the BRICS members? Where is their help with the opportunity to refinance Egypt's debt and save it from the clutches of the IMF and the Paris Club of Creditors? And is Egypt today looking for such an opportunity to re-borrow money from the BRICS members, who themselves need significant amounts of dollars to conduct trade with Western countries? So we have gradually arrived at the fact that today Egypt's external debt is more than $165 billion. Over the past 2 years, Egypt has paid $52 billion in debt obligations. At the same time, a demographic boom is brewing in the country. Egypt itself cites demographic growth as one of the main reasons for its economic problems. In 2013, the country's population was 93 million people, and in 2023, 10 years later, it was 113 million people. An increase of 2 million people per year. It is obvious that with an annual population growth of 1.7%, the Egyptian economy cannot cope. The state simply does not have enough jobs or housing for the country's citizens. The health and education systems are also suffering, and cannot be funded as quickly and consistently as Egypt's new young generation grows. Further, Egypt has big problems in industry. Egypt's industrial production, which accounts for 15% of GDP, plays an important role in the country's economy and provides jobs for millions of Egyptians, but its development has been hampered by a number of problems. Firstly, Egypt produces goods with low added value, as a result of which the competitiveness of Egyptian products suffers. Secondly, Egypt does not have a large sales base. The country has an insufficient export base for its products. Thirdly, the country has a high dependence on natural resources, in particular, water. And to solve all these problems and thereby stabilize the economy, Egypt approved a program of structural reforms as part of a broader program. Its title is Egypt Vision 2030. Will this program help the Arabs of Egypt? In some ways it will move the economy forward, but I'm afraid that the full implementation of this plan can be called into question. Egypt also loves expensive projects. And from here comes a whole series of problems for which the country may not be ready. Residents of Egypt, suffering from catastrophic inflation, cite expensive projects being implemented in the country as one of the reasons for the economic crisis. The Egyptian government is building new bridges, roads, airports, and entire cities. In general, this is very cool, but the question of mathematical feasibility is also on the agenda. While all of these projects are 100% vital to the Egyptian economy in the long term, their implementation currently requires significant financial injections, which puts significant pressure on the country's struggling economy. So how does Egypt solve its economic problems today? First, Egypt maintains high key rates. This is the most classic technique that blocks a business's access to easy and quick money. Also, within 4 years, Egypt plans to sell more than 30 state-owned companies representing 18 sectors of the country to any worthy investors in order to support the country's economy. These companies include the country's 3 banks, 7 petrochemical enterprises, 4 large real estate developers, 3 power plants and 2 insurance companies. Egypt also plans to abandon trade exchanges in dollars with the BRICS countries in order to reduce the need to use the dollar in mutual settlements. But this is unlikely to affect the domestic demand for the dollar among the local population. The less opportunity to buy the dollar in the country, the greater its liquid value. And joining the BRICS bloc is only a consequence of saving the country's economy from total collapse. BRICS in this case is considered by Egypt as another tool for minimizing the outflow of dollars from the country, thanks to which Egypt may be able to pay off its dollar loans better and faster. The economic situation in the country is so difficult that local media began to spread speculation about the possible sale or lease of the Suez Canal, which is the main breadwinner for all of Egypt. In response to publications on social networks and a number of media outlets about the bill that would create the Suez Canal Fund, denials followed from the government. Nevertheless, the fund is being created, but will be aimed at assisting the authorities in economic and investment activities, as well as combating crisis situations. Over the 70 years of modern Egypt's existence, the country has adopted a mixed economic policy, combining limited economic liberalization with an increasing role of the state in financing development projects and subsidizing basic goods. These erratic economic policies have led to a distorted version of the development of the country, which is already suffering from limited resources and the rate of population growth, and has created a number of problems that will have long-term consequences, including poverty, corruption, social and economic inequality, and high unemployment. =2. These circumstances have led to Egypt's high dependence on external investment and loans. Cairo has a long history of entering into loan agreements with the IMF and World Bank, but these experiences have been counterproductive and have not led to significant improvements in the country's economic and social conditions. In fact, existing agreements have exacerbated Egypt's economic vulnerability and increased its socio-economic problems. This kind of policy began to prevail under the current President al-Sisi, who did not deal with Egypt's structural problems. To finance his ambitious projects, he turned to regional allies and international financial organizations. Austerity measures have hit the lower classes particularly hard and increased the percentage of Egyptians living in poverty. Another key problem Egypt has faced over the past decade is the declining role of the private sector and the excessive involvement of the military in the country's economy. It is in any city in Egypt that you will see a large number of military and police. She's just everywhere. With the coming to power of President al-Sisi, the presence of the military in the economy has increased. The size of the public sector, including military-owned companies, as concerning it is estimated at nearly 70%. The army, the most consolidated state institution in Egypt, is exempt from part of taxes and the submission of many forms of reporting. The military was appointed to lead hundreds of projects and was gradually introduced into many sectors. The current situation does not allow attracting investment and slows down the development of the private sector. However, despite the political and socio-economic upheavals that Egypt has faced over the past decade, an analysis of a number of economic indicators allows us to state some stabilization of the macroeconomic situation in the country after the events of the Arab Spring. In a short period, Egypt managed to achieve stability in accordance with the reform plan adopted by the country's government, which led to gaining the trust of international financial institutions. The Egyptian economy has shown stable growth rates. Annual GDP growth over the past few years has averaged 4.5%. But the standard of living of most Egyptians was declining amid rising food prices and high youth unemployment. Almost a third of the population now lives below the poverty line. In addition, the Egyptian government relatively recently decided to reduce the role of the military in the country's economy as part of structural reforms financed by the IMF. This will increase the role of private entrepreneurship and create equal conditions for the public and private sectors. Against this backdrop, and following the suspension of planned stock exchange listings of a number of state-owned companies last May, the Egyptian government is moving quickly to privatize the vast public sector. The reason for this activity is prosaic. Cairo is feverishly looking for sources of foreign currency, which the authorities so desperately need. Last May, President al-Sisi ordered the government to develop a $40 billion private capital program over the next 4 years. This was to include listing army-owned enterprises on the stock exchange by the end of the year and selling stakes in some state-owned companies. In addition, the new agreement program with the IMF will allow Egypt to attract additional financing in the amount of $14 billion from international and regional partners. In general, the Gulf countries are also eyeing serious investment in Egypt as part of an extensive privatization program and have pledged more than $20 billion in deposits and investments. The protest potential in Egypt today remains and is very large, and the scale of the protests will depend on how the authorities react, as long as their preventive measures are effective. The habitually harsh reaction of the Egyptian security apparatus in the current conditions may serve as a catalyst for strengthening opposition sentiments, but at the same time, it seems to be the only possible way of responding for the current Egyptian regime. But now we have already entered the historical center of the capital of Egypt. As you can see, the city center was developed with colonial buildings in the 19th century and in the 20th century. You can see beautiful architecture here. But who took part in the construction? Various parties were involved in the construction and development of the city in the 19th century, including Egyptian authorities, under the leadership of the Khedive and later the King of Egypt. Various infrastructure projects were carried out in Cairo during this period. Public buildings were built and streets were put in order. The British administration was active in the city. In the late 19th century, Egypt came under British influence, and the British administration also contributed to the development of the city, including the construction of buildings in the style of colonial architecture. European investors and entrepreneurs. Due to the development of trade, the opening of the Suez Canal and the growth of the economy of Egypt and Cairo in particular, European investors and businessmen invested in the construction of residential and commercial projects. The sums were crazy, the volumes of construction were fantastic and amazing. Local craftsmen and architects also played an important role in the design and construction of buildings in the city. The result is a mixture of architectural styles, with elements of Egyptian, European and colonial architecture that can be seen in the city center. But how did all this happen? Let us talk about this topic while we are on the road and admiring these houses. It is officially believed that Cairo was founded in 969. This date is very arbitrary, because long before the 10th century there were settlements on the territory of modern Cairo. The area that is now the center of Cairo is much younger than the city itself. It is curious that in the place where the downtown is now located, 200 years ago few people lived. The emergence of the modern center was associated with the westernization of Egypt and the Ottoman Empire, when the fashion for everything Western began to spread in the Middle East. In the second half of the 19th century, Ismail Pasha, the Khedive, that is, ruler, of Egypt, being an educated man who lived part of his life in Paris, decided to create a second France in his native Egypt. For development in the Parisian style, with wide boulevards, squares, round squares from which the streets radiate as rays, the very same area that has now become the urban center of Cairo was chosen. As British influence on Egypt increased, thousands of Europeans settled here, permanently residing in Cairo. So everyone walking here at the end of the 19th or the first half of the 20th century felt like one foot in Africa and the other in Europe. French suits, dresses and perfumes, Italian wines were sold here, prestigious restaurants serving European cuisine operated, and visiting stars from the neighboring continent performed in concert halls and theaters. It all ended in 1952, when the Victorious Revolution abolished the monarchy in Egypt, confiscated Western property, and Europeans and Jews who had lost their homes were forced to flee the country. The owners left, but the architecture remained. Luxurious apartment buildings in the colonial style, mansions and villas with high ceilings and large balconies accepted other residents, Arabs. Unfortunately, the new owners, for the most part, did not care about the stucco on the facades and the painted entrances with columns. The former splendor has faded. If from the street side the condition of the houses often still seems more or less decent, then when you enter the courtyard's wells, reminiscent of those in St. Petersburg, you are convinced that the situation with the architectural heritage in Cairo is not the best. Nevertheless, it is in this area that most tourists now spend the night and walk. Indeed, in terms of the number of beautiful old buildings in the European style, Cairo can still compete with many large cities in Western Europe. Well, let's summarize our episode about this trip to Cairo. As we conclude our journey through Cairo, let us pay attention to the key points. It is important to maintain the openness of the economy to attract investment and advanced technologies to the country. Creating high value-added products contributes to sustainable development. Expanding diplomatic ties plays a crucial role in strengthening global relations, and improving the level of education in Egypt becomes the foundation for future progress. Otherwise, with a high birth rate, the local population is at risk of remaining on permanently low wages and having low work qualifications. Your adventure guide, Aprelski, was always with you. Subscribe to our channel for more exciting travels and interesting stories. Don't forget to leave comments under the video. Your opinion is important to us. If you want to keep up to date with my daily life, follow me on Instagram via the link in the description. And for those who want to support our releases, become a channel sponsor by following the link to my website and contribute to the creation of exciting content. Thank you for your attention and see you again on our channel.